A Voyage of Self-Discovery. Translator's afterword. And the Lord said unto me, Arise, take thy journey before the people. Moses, Deuteronomy 10:11. It has been a long and interesting journey indeed. This journey began for me in the autumn of 2004, in a manner of speaking, aboard ship. The ship was the Patrice Lumumba, and belonged to one Vladimir Nikolaevich Migre, a seasoned entrepreneur who traded up and down the Ob River in western Siberia, selling produce and manufactured goods brought from southern cities to northern villages, and buying up local handicrafts in return. As with the vast majority of Migre's readers, the description of the Lumumba in Book 1, Chapter 1, The Ringing Cedar, served as my first introduction to the much more powerful, mentally speaking, literary vessel known as the Ringing Cedars series. I was invited on board the Ringing Cedars series by its editorial captain, Leonid Shirashkin, who had in turn been commissioned by Admiral Migre to sail across the seas and bring the ship's precious cargo of ideas to the land of Anglophonia. I was hired as an English-speaking navigator familiar with this new land's linguistic waters, and equipped by 40 years' experience in Russian-English translation to present these ideas in a format capable of reaching the hearts and minds of Anglophones. The adventure sounded promising and, admittedly, impelled by a sense of divine guidance. I gladly signed on, eager to set sail with a yo-he-ho, or ek ukenmen, as the Volga boatmen were said to chant. 8 times, counted them. No sooner had we delivered a shipment to its destination than we went back for more. Now, as we approach a layover of indefinite duration, following the completion of our 9th voyage, I can look back and honestly say that the experience really has delivered on its promises. These trips have been truly rewarding in terms of both excitement and education, and I am actually going to miss the many ups and downs that my editor and I have been tossed about by in its particular venture in literary navigation. Part of me will be sad at last to disembark onto terra firma, safer perhaps, but not nearly as exciting. But I shall content myself with the glad part, watching from afar as the 9 shipments of ideas we helped deliver begin bearing fruit in the consciousness and lives of Americans, Australians, Britons, Canadians, New Zealanders, South Africans, and countless others who for some reason have had the English edition of the Ringing Cedars series land in their hands. From a translator's point of view, each of the linguistic shoals, sandbanks, and icebergs we met along the way, not to mention the occasional typhoon, offered a particular challenge. Some of these challenges were more formidable in appearance than others. My editor and I soon discovered that the task at hand was not just a matter of translation, pure and simple, for we were soon confronted in our journey by a whole host of cultural phenomena, references to people, places, institutions, historical events, and cultural traditions that would not be as familiar to Westerners as they were to native readers of the series, and hence required sometimes substantial research and documentation. Mindful of the lessons of the Titanic, I hope we were at least moderately successful in resisting the temptation to place too much trust in technology, or to become overconfident and over-reliant in our own previous professional experience. The above-mentioned challenges, both large and small, were met through constant reference to both paper-published and online charts, Russian and English dictionaries, thesauruses, encyclopedias, and Google searches. Sometimes it came down to literally to phone a friend, and on several occasions a prayer for more of that divine guidance that had urged me to climb aboard in the first place. Not only that, but results were checked over and over again before being entered into the final log. On occasion, we even found ourselves exploring hitherto uncharted waters and had to navigate, as it were, by the seat of our pants. For example, How to describe a Russian dacha and its primary function as a vegetable-raising center to North Americans and other Anglophones raised on vacation cottages with their swimming, boating, and sundry recreational facilities. How to select a suitable English equivalent for the word chelovek, a Russian word that still designates a human being of either gender when faced with a choice between human, derived from words associated with lower concepts like the ground, and B, man, which originally, like chelovek, described a thinking, intelligent being of either gender, but has since become narrowed in meaning to include, in popular parlance at least, only half of the human race. How to portray dolmens and other sacred sites to a culture more accustomed to high-rise construction sites and internet websites. How to put across the concept of one's millennia-old rodina, motherland, to readers whose roots in their current place of residence may go back no more than a few years, or even mere months. How to express concepts of the pre-Christian Vedic Russian culture in an intelligible manner to English speakers, when such concepts are still unfamiliar to many Russians themselves in their native tongue. How to reproduce the author's plethora of writing styles, from choppy novice writer to authentic-sounding blue-collar dialogue to poetic prose of Anastasia's metaphysical descriptions. Not to mention poetry itself in such a way as to convey to the reader not only the semantic meaning, but just as importantly, the literary feeling of the original work. It is the Ringing Cedars series readers, even more than its literary critics, who will be the ultimate judges of our success in meeting these challenges. Then, beyond the translation questions, which, after all, can sometimes get bogged down in the nitty-gritty of historical etymology and psycholinguistic nuances, lies the broader issue of how the series as a whole is reaching the Anglophone readership, far more attuned to Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek or J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter than to the Holy Bible or the Bhagavad Gita. A relationship that is only too ready and willing to embrace phenomena that lie outside traditional physical perception, provided that the works presenting them are duly confined to the fiction or occult shelves of their local library, bookshop, or video store. After all, one doesn't have to read too far into the RCS before encountering passages that look as though they might be right at home in a Star Trek episode or a sci-fi novel. Anastasia's telepathic ray, for example, or the fiery sphere described to the author as watching over Anastasia as a baby, or her later reference to the not-so-mythical fire-breathing Gorinith serpent. It is all too easy on the basis of such examples to dismiss the whole series as just another, albeit very intricately woven, sci-fi yarn. It is all too easy, upon first glance, to classify Anastasia's descriptions, in this present volume, for example, of so-called pagan rites in the pre-Christian Vedic Russian civilization as just another fanciful foray into the esoteric or the occult, or to pass off the RCS as yet another entry into the wishful thinking category where a number of critics have pegged recent feel-good films such as The Secret. What distinguishes the Ringing Cedars series from science fiction, or at least from the vast majority of science fiction works, is the fact that it attempts to show how even such far-fetched accounts as those mentioned above could actually refer to naturally occurring, scientifically explainable phenomena, rather than just mere literary inventions or the occult fantasies of the human mind. After all, in 1865, Jules Verne, From the Earth to the Moon, was written and received as a science fiction classic, only to turn into scientific reality a little more than a century later with the success of the Apollo 11 moon mission on the 20th of July, 1969. As for the charge of occultism, Anastasia, through the author, takes great pains, especially in Book 6, to distance her concept of the universe from any kind of occult phenomena. These only lead mankind, as she says, to being completely disoriented as to the space created by God, and in regard to the rites of love, in particular, described in the present book, Anastasia's grandfather assures the author, none of these rites was characterized by occult superstition as today. Each one served as a school of higher learning and examination by the universe. Anastasia says, Anastasia's grandfather does. Yes, in almost any discussion of Vladimir Migre's Ringing Cedars series among its readers, phrases like these tend to trip off the tongue without a second thought, leaving many outsiders and even some insiders to wonder, who is this Anastasia? Which brings us to what may be the most frequently asked reader's question of all, one of which Quebec writer Mado Suave chose as the opening sentence of her review of the series in the spring 2007 issue of Le Journal VIII. Anastasia existe? Does Anastasia exist? I have a feeling Suave expresses what is on many readers' minds as she continues. Does she really live in the Siberian taiga, or was she born of the imagination of a clever entrepreneur? Even after reading the first 4 books of the series, it is still difficult to answer this question. A broad range of opinion on the issue has indeed been expressed to date by the RCS readers collectively, from those who dismiss her as a mere figment of the author's imagination to those who see her as the reincarnation of some ancient prophet. But to me, this only begs a further set of questions. What does it mean to exist? Is existence an objective or a subjective state? Is existence confined to material perception, or can it be determined by non-material criteria? Faith, for example. Migre quotes Anastasia herself as saying, "I exist for those for whom I exist." What could that possibly mean? In pondering the question of the existence of Migre's Anastasia and her family, it might be worthwhile considering a few other personages whose existence has been subject for questioning over the ages. Names like Shakespeare, Santa Claus, Father Christmas, Job in the Old Testament, and even Christ Jesus in the New. In a civilization so reliant upon physical, material evidence as the primary, if not the only criterion for proof of existence, perhaps it is little wonder that sometimes figures with a larger-than-life reputation fall prey to public suspicion as to their very existence. Are we not almost globally educated to be skeptical about anything that departs from a society-defined, materially determined norm? Such is the case with the man considered to be the greatest writer in the English-speaking world has ever produced. No simple village dweller, some have said, could have possibly produced all the time-tested plays and sonnets credited to the bard of Avon. And yet, few today would deny that the writer universally known as Shakespeare actually existed in some form. After all, his masterpieces did not magically appear one day out of a vacuum. Many people today, not only in America but elsewhere in the world, are familiar with the appeal of a little 8-year-old girl named Virginia O'Hanlon to the editor of the New York Sun newspaper in September 1897. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? And few can forget the key phrase italicized below from veteran newsman Francis Church's memorable reply, even if they are not as familiar with the writer's name or his remarkable justification for this reply. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except what they see. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. And lest anyone hasten to dismiss Santa Claus in contrast to Shakespeare as a completely mythical figure, it should be remembered that St. Nicholas was indeed a real human being in the flesh. He was the bishop of Myra, in what is now Western Turkey, back in the 3rd century CE. It was his reputation for secret giving to the needy that eventually evolved into the popular story of the world's ultimate holiday gift giver. A similar question hangs over the Old Testament character of Job in the Bible, according to Dumelo's Bible commentary. It has always been a question of whether the book of Job is to be regarded as history or parable. Among the Jews themselves, the prevailing opinion was that it was strictly historical, though some of their rabbis were inclined to think that the person of Job was created by the writer of this book in order to set forth his teaching on the problem that was vexing human thought. The opinion of Luther is probably the correct one, viz., that a person called Job did really exist, but that his history has been treated poetically. Can we expect a similar commentary to be written about the person of Anastasia a millennium or two hence? While Job may indeed have been mainly an allegory written for moral instruction, what of the most celebrated among the human figures of the Bible, namely Christ Jesus, whose life and works form the very foundation of the whole movement of Christianity? Many Christians believe Jesus to be the earthly incarnation of God himself. Others accept him rather as God's Son and messenger to mankind. But there are few indeed who deny his historical existence, and yet the authenticity of the gospel records is occasionally called into question, and not just by atheists. It is instructive to examine the writings of two late 19th century spiritual thinkers on this point, one of them a peasant philosopher in Russia, and the other the founder of a worldwide Christian movement headquartered in America. While neither of them actually questioned Jesus' existence themselves, both shed a non-traditional light on the ultimate significance of that existence. On the 12th of May, 1888, the Moluccan peasant writer Fedor Alexovich Seltov, a deeply committed Christian, sent a treatise he had just written to Leo Tolstoy, whom he regarded as a mentor, entitled On Life as Faith in Christ. Toward the end of the treatise, he made a rather startling declaration. None of the actions and events accompanying Christ's sermon are a stumbling block for me. I do not rely upon them as a basis for understanding truth, and it makes no difference to me whether they happened or did not happen, or how they happened, whether they were imaginary or real, whether the Gospels were written by the apostles or by someone else. None of that makes a difference, nor is it dear to me. What is dear to me is only the truth which Christ imparted. It in itself is a precious jewel, and my last task to know its price, and to know why it is so precious. About 2 decades later, on the 1st of December 1906, the discoverer of Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, published a statement in the weekly magazine she had founded, the Christian Science Sentinel, detailing her professional relations with Reverend James Henry Wiggin, whom she had hired as a publishing consultant, and refuting public allegations that he had had a hand in the authorship of her seminal work, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. In the statement, she reported Reverend Wiggin as asking her the question, "How do you know that there ever was such a man as Christ Jesus?" To which she replies, in part, "I do not find my authority for Christian science in history, but in revelation. If there had never existed such a person as the Galilean prophet, Jesus, it would make no difference to me. I should still know that God's spiritual ideal is the only real man in his image and likeness." It is evident that for both Zeltov and Eddy, it was not the person of Christ Jesus that was sacred and significant, but the ideas, the Christ ideas, one might say, that Jesus presented to the world. Ideas which could be effectively practiced in our age and their practice taught to others, as Eddy proved not only by her own remarkable works of healing, but, more importantly, by the thousands upon thousands of spiritual healings brought about by her students, their students, and students of their students, right up to the present day. For these students, textbook study and class instruction, while an acknowledged help, inevitably have taken second place to individual prayer, to their own direct mental and spiritual connection to God as their ultimate teacher and ultimate healer. And lest there be any doubt as to how Eddie viewed her own role as a presenter of the science of spiritual healing to the world, in her later years she stated inequivocably, "Those who look for me in person or elsewhere than in my writings lose me instead of find me." So now perhaps we can look at the Journal VIII reviewer's question, does Anastasia exist in a new light? It was the same question Suave had put to me in an interview in preparation for her review, where she quotes in my reply in French along these lines: "I believe that Anastasia certainly exists in some form, but not necessarily in a fleshly body visible to our material eyes, even though I would not rule that out. As I see it, there is no doubt that she exists as a powerful idea, and that she is a force of inspiration. She exists in the words, in the rich thoughts of feelings and promises as transcribed by Migre. And today I would add, in the spirit of Seltov, she exists in the hearts of them who are ready to seek out and apply for themselves the ideas she presents, and this is what is truly dear to me." Does that mean that the author's portrayal of Anastasia as a living human being is irrelevant or unimportant? Not at all. For some readers, accepting her as a bodily personage, at least to begin with, may be extremely helpful, by identifying with a figure who expresses what seem like incredible qualities of the divine, and yet still affirms, "I am man." Many readers may get their first glimmer of awareness of their own innate capacities, but the more they read, especially in a second or third examination of a text they have read before, their initial impressions may gradually evolve away from personage and more into idea. When Francis Church identified the real Santa Claus with the spiritual qualities of love and generosity and devotion, he did not thereby obliterate the image of a jolly old man in a sleigh from a young child's mind, but enriched her temporary image of Santa with a new dimension, a new idea. As the child grew older and developed her reasoning capacities, she would have been able to retain this new idea in her thought, even when she no longer clung to the old image of a personal gift-giver. In each of the cases we have looked at, we can witness the evolution of an image at work in individual human thought. In Book 6, Chapter 6, Imagery and Trial, Anastasia describes the image as an entity of energy invented by human thought, created by a single man or by several together, and further likens it to an actor's portrayal of a dramatic persona on stage, a portrayal in which the invented image acquires a temporary embodiment. Note that the portrayal of one and the same persona will vary from actor to actor, and even from the performance to performance by the same actor, especially as the actor gains new insight into the deeper dimensions of the character he is portraying. But just as Seltov's image of the central figure of the New Testament evolved into one focused more on the truth itself than the person of its human embodiment, just as Eddie, a real-life historical figure who frequently found herself targeted by both adoring worshippers and malicious critics, finally urged her followers to stop looking to her as a person and start practicing the truths she revealed by healing their own and others' mental, physical ailments. So Anastasia, whatever personal form she may possess, urges through Migre a similar charge upon her would-be followers. In Book 2, for example, in reply to the author's query as to whether she personally might have been helping him in a particular situation, Anastasia tells him everything in the universe is interrelated. To perceive what is really going on in the universe, one need only look into oneself. And in Book 3, when Vladimir expresses curiosity as to the extent of her abilities, "Can you answer any question confronting science today?" Anastasia offers the following reply: "Many of them, perhaps, but every scientist, indeed every man, can find the answers. Everything depends upon the purity of one's thoughts and the motive for asking. Over and over again, she emphasizes that the ideas and powers she possesses are within the grasp of every individual on the earth, because they all come from the same source, i.e., the Creator, God. Over and over again, both she and her grandfather keep urging Vladimir, and by extension every reader of the RCS, to resist the temptation to rely upon them as a personal source of wisdom and seek instead to find and utilize the ideas within themselves. Try not to wallow in all your information and contemplations, Vladimir, Anastasia's grandfather exhorts in Book 4. Decide what's real for yourself. And in Chapter 1, Love, the Essence of the Cosmos, of the current volume, he accuses Vladimir of laziness of mind, for constantly pestering him with questions when he should be looking for the answers within. Subsequently, he admonishes, I speak and you listen, and instead of working out your own conclusions on your thought, you are merely taking note of mine. Similarly, time and again, Anastasia urges Vladimir not just to accept her conclusions at face value, but to reason things through for himself by logical thinking, a capacity which her grandfather points out, when not actively cultivated, is in danger of being lost by mankind. She too warns the author against laziness of mind. In Book 8, Chapter 5, Divine Nutrition, when Vladimir confesses, It's still not too clear to me just how I should be thinking, she gently assures him, It will become clear if you are not too lazy to think. Again, in Book 8, Anastasia cautions Vladimir to be wary of relying on words alone. When asked by Vladimir about the role of words, she replies, It is not the words that are important, but rather people's conscious awareness. Words, of course, are necessary to bring forth. A conscious awareness of eternal life will help perfect man's way of life. Words are similar to outward appearances. They often play an important role in shaping one's initial conscious awareness of an idea. But like one's early person-focused impressions, they tend to fall away as the image evolves in the direction of the divine. Hence, if one is truly to follow Anastasia, it would seem wise to heed her own advice and start seeking her out, as many readers are already doing, not in person and not just in words about her, as fascinating as those may be, but in idea. The idea which, she says, time and again throughout the series, exists in every single one of us if we are only alert enough to harness our mental capacities to discover our own innate purity and power of thought in the likeness of our Creator, and then start applying this idea to renewing and improving our day-to-day lives. And because the evolution of an image is primarily an individual phenomenon, although yes, it may at times be collective, i.e. a shared individual experience, we shouldn't be surprised if our own discovery of Anastasia and her idea appears to evolve in a different way or at a different pace from that of other readers, or is different from the perception we ourselves had in a previous reading. Like an actor honing a portrayal on stage from performance to performance, each one of us is evolving our own image of her as a persona. But the more we seek and find her not so much in history but in revelation, the more we focus on the message rather than on the person of the messenger. And within our own hearts and minds, the stronger a position we shall be in to discover harmony within ourselves and with others, and the more deeply we shall be able to comprehend and appreciate her own beautiful self-declaration. I exist for those for whom I exist. The power of the Anastasia idea presented throughout this series was certainly one of the reasons I signed on to these voyages 3 years ago, and the fascinating concept that have multiplied therefrom have indeed made the whole venture most worthwhile. Anastasia's and her grandfather's emphasis on the need for logical thinking and a conscious application of universal ideas to one's life practice is a clear example of how the RCS eminently transcends what is popularly classified as science fiction. In my translator's preface to Book 1, I described the work, and by extension the series, as a chronicle of ideas, a metaphysical treatise, set forth with both the supporting evidence of a documentary account and the entertainment capacity of a novel. In other words, it can be read as any of these three in isolation, but only by taking the three dimensions together will the reader have something approaching a complete picture of the book. And all three are infused with a degree of soul-felt inspiration that can only be expressed in poetry. Having completed the whole series, I would now add that it is a chronicle which touches upon very many of the disciplines traditionally defined as academic, but in the context of their interrelation with each other and their application to our daily human life. As I look back over the RCS, apart from its obvious focus on ecology and environmental science, I can think of references to astronomy, biology, chemistry, physics, forestry, agriculture, horticulture, geology, archaeology, engineering, architecture, medicine, and the healing arts, psychology and psychotherapy, sociology, criminology, political science, economics, philosophy, religion, drama, literature, music and poetry, linguistics, foreign languages, and quite possibly several more, all presented with a view to their application to everyday life, including work and leisure activities, along with love, marriage, family, and other interpersonal relationships. The voyage of the RCS has taken in all these ports of call along the way, and not just from a sailor's point of view, try an astronaut's perspective. The voyage indeed reaches unto the very stars. In the line with the Moses epigraph above, I have now taken my journey, and by the time you read this, you may well have already taken yours, at least once. But I trust the ideas you have taken in along the way will stand with you in good stead for many ages yet to come. As your English-speaking navigator, I salute you and wish you a hearty bon voyage as you set out on or continue your own voyage of self-discovery in the likeness of the Creator. See you on a star. On a star, see ya. Ottawa, Canada, 31st of December, 2007. John Wordsworth. The Book of Happiness. Editor's Afterword. Papa, which do you like better, your computer or us? Your family? My daughter Lada inquired of me one morning as I was sitting at work in my home office. What? Of course I like you better. Why? I replied, still glued to the screen. It's just that you spend all day long in front of the computer, but I'd rather you played with me or come see the pumpkins Mama and I have planted. Even when we go for a walk all together, all you do is think about your work. You barely notice us. Well, that's true, I admitted. But I do need to earn money, too, to pay for the piece of land we plant our garden on, for example. In other words, to afford things that are important in life. Nonsense, she protested. It's all arranged like that on purpose, so as to make you think that everything important in life you can buy for money. To make you think money's the most important thing of all. As I turned to face her, Lada looked me straight in the eye and added, tugging at my sleeve, You know, Papa, I really feel you need to come with me to my tree house. I'll teach you 3 lessons on how to live happily ever after without money. Seeing the seriousness of the issue, I rose from my desk. Lada took me by the hand and escorted me to her green classroom. Half an hour later, as she finished delivering her 3 lessons and made sure I grasped their key components, Lada surprised me with a fresh demand. And now, before you go, you must promise me that you shall never, ever share what I have just taught you with anybody. How come? I queried. If the path you outlined to me can really lead people to happiness, I thought you would encourage me to tell others about it. Don't you know about what happened with the Book of Happiness? What Book of Happiness? Never heard of it. Lada crossed her hands on her knees, sighed, and began telling me the story. Once upon a time, in a large city with dirty, polluted air, there lived a man who had lost his happiness. It seemed as though he had searched for it everywhere, including behind the sofa and under his desk. But happiness was nowhere to be seen. It occurred to the man that his cat might have taken his happiness outside and hid it somewhere. So he searched all around his apartment block but found nothing. Exhausted by the search, he decided to spend the following day, his day off, in the woods picking mushrooms. And so he did. He put on his big rubber boots and his backpack, took a knife and a large basket woven out of willow twigs, and headed off. He had a very good day, and even forgot his grief over the lost happiness. By the time the sun was setting, his basket was so full of beautiful large mushrooms it was hard to lift off the ground. The man was ready to go home, but now he couldn't find his way out of the forest. There was no visible path. He tried going in one direction, which he hoped would lead him out into the paved road, but ended up in a swamp. He had no electric torch, no flashlight, and in the fading twilight it was hard to see the way, so the man decided to spend the night in the forest, and tried to find his way home the following day. He made a bed out of dry pine needles under a tall pine tree, put his backpack under his head for a pillow, and tried to go to sleep. But the mosquitoes attacked him, putting sleep out of the question. So he just lay there, immersed in his thoughts. Finally, he drifted off into a dream. The man awoke suddenly in the middle of the night. The forest was dark and quiet all around, but far off in the distance, over to one side, he could make out what seemed to be a light glistening midst the branches. Thinking it could be a house or a lamppost on the road, the man picked himself up and walked in the direction of the light, slowly making his way through the darkness. After a while, he found himself emerging from the dense bushes into a glade. There was no house or lamppost anywhere in sight, but in the center of the glade there was a moss-covered hillock radiating a soft golden light. As the man approached the hillock, he saw an old book in leather binding lying on the top. The light was coming from the book. The gold lettering on the cover read, "The Book of Happiness." He opened it and began to read. The book opened with a promise to show the reader how to find happiness. "Wow, this is exactly what I need," thought the man as he hefted the heavy tome from the moss and hurried out of the glade, taking the book with him. Perhaps it was the light coming from the book, or perhaps his own insight, but he now felt confident as to which way he should go. And indeed it wasn't long before he found the path, then the paved road, and began walking along the empty night-time highway in the direction of the town, his mushroom-filled basket in one hand and the Book of Happiness in the other. Dawn was breaking in the sky when he reached the outskirts of the city and soon afterward his home. Despite his heavy load, he felt neither tired nor sleepy. He put the basket down by the front door, took off his rubber boots, plunged onto the sofa, and immersed himself in reading. He finished the whole book that same day, and it delivered on its promise. It brought him his happiness back. His happiness turned out to be lying behind the bookshelf, the only place he had not looked when searching for it. Presently he remembered that at one time he had indeed put his happiness on top of his bookshelf to save space in his small flat. Then he had added more books on top, which had apparently pushed the happiness over and caused it to fall behind. When the man, following the instructions from the book, regained his happiness, it was all covered in dust, hair, and cockroach feces, but he wiped it clean, and it began to look like new once more. So as not to lose it again, he decided to carry it with him all the time. He attached it to a watch chain he bought specifically for this purpose, and now carried his happiness in his pocket. For days and weeks he found himself in a state of bliss and joy, but seeing the unhappy people around him, on the sidewalks of the street, in offices and shops, he could not help but go back to his thought to the very last statement contained in the book, namely, "You shall not show this book to others." But just why, he thought, can't I share the Book of Happiness with others to make them happy? This can't be fair, seeing how much suffering and injustice there is in the world. Gradually, as he contemplated the world around him, his feeling of happiness began to give way to a sense of disquietude, which over time became unbearable. Eventually, the man resolved to try sharing the book with just one man, a fellow worker who had spent his week compiling some sort of production reports on his computer, and who looked particularly lean and unhappy. And so, one day, he brought the book with him to work, and toward the end of their shift, entered his workmate's cubicle. Explaining its significance, he lent the book to him for just one night, on his earnest promise that he would return it the next morning. That night, as he was going to sleep, lying in his bed and clasping his chained happiness to his chest, he felt blissful and fulfilled once more at the thought of sharing the path to happiness with even one fellow human being. The next morning, however, a sticky feeling of unease crept into him when he saw that his workmate he had lent the book to the night before was not in his office. The man managed to bear this uncertainty until noon, trying to console himself with the thought that his friend must be finishing the last page of the book at home and would appear at the end of the corridor any moment. As this did not happen by the lunch break, the man obtained his colleague's home address from the manager, who had been trying to reach him by phone the whole morning without success, and ran over to his place. There he found the door of the apartment wide open and his workmate gone. With him was gone, too, the Book of Happiness. At first, the man found it hard to live with the nagging thought that he himself had not heeded the book's warning, and was now to blame for its disappearance. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the sensation of loss gradually wore down, and life returned to normal. Then, one morning a year later, as the man was walking to the office, he sensed a strange agitation in the air. Everywhere, people could be seen shouting and running, and a huge queue had formed in front of the neighborhood bookstore. With a dark feeling of foreboding, the man made his way through the crowd to the bookshop window where, lo and behold, 100 copies of the latest sensational release were on display. He gasped as he read, in large golden letters on the cover of each book, the Book of Happiness. At this moment, the store window lost its ability to withstand the pressure of the human bodies leaning against it, and it shattered. Pieces of broken glass showered down on the crowd. A moment later, a flood of people rushed to the display case and emptied it. Dozens of people were now running away from the bookstore, each clasping a volume to their chest. One of these people was the man who had found this book more than a year ago in the forest. He rushed back to his apartment and leafed through his prize. There was not a shred of doubt left. This was an exact reprint of his book, apparently made from the copies stolen a year earlier by his workmate. Strange as it may seem, though, the man did not feel angry at him, but rather quivered in excited anticipation as to what would come next. For the next few days, the whole city was caught up in a reading frenzy. Nobody seemed to go to work or even go outdoors. The whole populace, young and old, were staying home and reading the amazing yet simple revelations of the Book of Happiness. And yes, more than one soul puzzled over the last sentence in the book. "You shall not show this book to others." They questioned themselves as to why this restriction was imposed, and more importantly, why the book had gained such tremendous circulation despite this reservation. But the general welfare resulting from the wide distribution of the book and its ideas was so palpable that these questions were soon forgotten. For the next 2 weeks, few businesses were open in the city, as all citizens joined in a spontaneous festival to celebrate their new awareness and congratulate each other on the new era that the discovery of this remarkable book had ushered in upon them. And when the people did return to their workplaces, they were so overfilled with happiness that they took to their routine tasks with joyous enthusiasm. The bakers were baking tastier bread, the builders were laying stronger foundations for new buildings, and the policemen became more polite than ever before. While not just crime, but even traffic accidents seemed to completely disappear overnight. Weeks passed, and the whole city and the surrounding countryside were transformed in such a remarkable beneficial fashion that everyone was going to bed with smiles on their faces in excited anticipation of what new joys the next day would bring. And only the man who had originally discovered the book seemed to have any recollection of the warning it contained in its final line. Yet the warning, even for him, seemed to pale into insignificance. Months went by as he came out of his apartment block one morning into the blossoming of the spring. His ears were blasted by the sound of nearby police car sirens, which no one had heard for a very long time. He hurried around the corner just in time to see 2 policemen shove an arrested felon into a patrol car and take off. The elderly lady left standing on the pavement was explaining to passers-by that a young delinquent had assaulted her and tried to wrench her happiness from her. Her attacker had complained that she possessed more of it than he himself. The next day, similar incidents started to take place all over the city as more and more people began to suspect their neighbors, colleagues, or just passers-by of usurping a larger portion of happiness than they were entitled to. Before long, all hell broke loose. Shooting began in the streets and the neighborhoods. People were murdered for the tiny pieces of happiness they were desperately trying to cling on to. The police department was overwhelmed. Days later, the police themselves joined the trend and raided homes to carry out whatever happiness remained, for government needs. Rumors had it, however, that police were keeping the confiscated happiness for their personal greed, and even fighting over it amongst themselves. A large portion of the populace fled the distressed city. Most of the businesses closed, and of the few individuals who remained, nobody so much as cared even to remove the rotting corpses of the slain men, women, and children from the streets and squares that just a few weeks ago had been home to, as it had seemed at the time, boundless happiness. As the man who had originally found the Book of Happiness in the woods was making his way stealthily along the completely deserted avenue leading to the city's main square, he suddenly heard the squeaking of brakes, a lone gunshot, the clapping of car doors, and the receding noise of a motor. When it finally died away in the distance, he mustered his strength and turned the corner into the plaza where the incident had happened only moments earlier. There, by the fountain, lay the man who had stolen the original book a year ago, and in a pool of fresh blood nearby, the hefty, leather-bound volume opened to the last page. "You shall not show this book to others," read the final line. Centuries went by. Wind and water had eaten away stone, concrete, and metal. Paved streets and squares had given way to trees and meadows. Virtually nothing now betrayed the traces of the former city, concealed as it was in a lush, dense forest. The few ruins that remained had been fenced off and designated as historical monuments, occasionally drawing the odd tourist group from faraway urban center. One day, a visitor with a basket woven from willow twigs separated from his group and, lured by the most beautiful mushrooms he had ever seen, wandered deep into the forest, off the beaten path. Late in the afternoon, as he was crossing a large glade on his way back to the tourist camp, he stumbled over something in the high grasses. He reached down and brought up a thick book in a leather binding with gold lettering. "The Book of Happiness," read the title. "Wow," thought the man, "this must be a real oldie and probably worth a fortune." Hiding it from his companions, he returned to the camp, when alone in his tent, took out the book, opened it, and started reading. He read all through the night, feeling no drowsiness nor fatigue. When he emerged from his tent in the morning, the world presented itself to him in a new and happy light. "There's only one thing I cannot grasp," he thought as he watched his fellow campers busying themselves around the fire. "Just why does it say you shall not show this book to others?" Lada finished her account, and we spent some time sitting there quietly without saying a word, listening to the breeze ruffling through the treetops and the crickets chirping in the grass. "Do you know what the surest way to keep a secret is?" Lada finally asked, breaking the silence. "No idea," I confessed. "What is it?" "To forget it." Then she opened the palm of her hand, in which, it turned out, she had been clasping all the while 3 little round clumps rolled from some kind of herb. "But I have an even better solution, one especially for you," she continued. "This is a special kind of grass that helps keep secrets. You go ahead and eat these clumps. If you eat enough of them, you will still be able to remember the 3 lessons I taught you, but you will not be able to share them with others. If you eat too many of them, you will forget everything I told you. Either way, you won't be able to share them with others." "And how much is enough? If I eat all 3, will I still remember the lessons myself?" I inquired. "That," Lada observed, "you will find out for yourself after you've eaten them." Noticing our prolonged absence, my wife Ira came looking for us in the far corner of the garden. "And just what might you be doing here?" she asked with a smile, finally spotting us under the tree. I hesitated, looking at my wife and daughter by turns as I swallowed down the last bit of the third clump. We were playing treehouse." "I see." Ira gave me an understanding look and started on her way back to the house. "Come when you're hungry, lunch is ready. Though I gather you've just had some snacks." "Hey, Mama," Lada called out after her. "Do you happen to know what is the most important thing in life?" Ira turned and confidently replied, "Life is." "Wow, you got it right this time." Lada jumped up and clapped her hands for joy. Then she turned to me, beaming with pride and delight at the degree of mutual understanding our family had achieved. I hope the 3 clumps were just enough. Maui, Hawaii, USA, the 19th of December, 2007. Leonid Shirashkin. The Ringing Cedars series, read to you by Nicole, in Grenada, June 2017 to June 2020. Thank you for listening.